I just saw Denise is here, so I just want to say hi to Denise. But second grade classrooms, everywhere, because it's such an honor. And every time I get to tell this story, it brings me back to the day I was healed. So this is much for me as it is for you guys. I always tell this story before I begin my talk because it just points to God's plan in our life. And it's a story about a farmer who was the richest farmer in the village because he owned a horse. Well, one day that horse disappeared. The farmer was upset. The neighbors came over, said, "This is terrible. What are you going to do?" And the farmer said, "Well, it could be good. It could be bad. Who knows?" A couple of days later, the horse came back, brought with it many other horses. They filled the corral. The neighbors were excited. They said, "We all get a horse. We all get our work done." And the farmer said, "Could be good. Could be bad. Who knows?" The farmer decided to train the horses, so he had his son train one of the horses. The horse threw the boy. He fell and broke his leg. Again, the neighbors come over lamenting, "This is terrible. He was your only son. What are you going to do?" And the farmer said, "Could be good. Could be bad. Who knows?" A couple of days later, the military came through the village collecting up all the young men. They got to the farmer's house. The boy was in bed in a cast, and they passed him by. Could be good. Could be bad. Who knows? The moral of the story is God has a plan in our lives. And every time that plan doesn't go the way we want it, we get mad at him. We get angry instead of trusting him and knowing that he will get us out of it. In my own life, my wife Judy and I got married at a very young age. She was 18 and I just turned 19. We both had to leave college. Neither one of us had a job. Everybody said, "You're not going to make it." Well, 13 kids later, 22 grandkids later, 45 years later, we're doing pretty good. My oldest boy, our second child, was born autistic. To have an autistic child is a very difficult thing to do, especially for a young parent. We had no idea what we were doing. Artie was the only autistic child in the town of Hingham where we lived at the time. Now there's many. To have any more children after Artie was going to take a great deal of faith and believe that Jesus Christ would make any more children come along the way we wanted them, I hope. But Artie, turns out that he starts winning gold medals in the Special Olympics. He's by far our easiest child, and everybody loves Artie. My 8th child, Joseph Anthony, died at the age of 2 months from sudden infant death syndrome. The most devastating thing that ever happened to our family. To get over the death of a child at any age is difficult, but after a certain amount of time, it becomes more bearable, and many tears and prayers, and you realize what a great gift life is from God, and we need to cherish every moment we have. And at the age of 44, I got cancer. And when someone tells you have cancer, you don't necessarily think that's a good thing. But in my case, it was the best thing that ever happened to me. It brought me back to God. In September of 1999, I got sick. I played a couple of sports when I was in college. I was an avid golfer. I couldn't play 4 holes of golf without having to stop. There was a burning inside my body. Judy suggested I have a physical, which I did, and they found I was anemic, which is unusual for a man. So I went and had more tests. They found I had severe erosive esophagitis, which is Barrett's esophagus. It's a very common malady. They put me on a medicine, and they said, "Come back in a month." A month later, I went back to see the doctor. I'd lost 45 pounds. My face was that gray cancer color. I was completely exhausted. The doctor said, "Well, apparently the medicine hasn't started to take effect yet, so we're going to keep you on it for another month." Had I done that, I wouldn't be standing here today. I told Judy what the doctor said. She said, "That's insane. We're going to get you into a Boston hospital." Boston's renowned for many wonderful cancer hospitals. She called the Mass General. The Mass General said, "Sure, we can see your husband in about a month." So she started to pray. As she prayed, our doorbell in Hingham, Mass rang. It was a dear friend that lived 200 miles away. He just happened to be in the neighborhood. He came in, Judy told him my story, and he said, "My sister works at the Mass General." They made a phone call. 2 days later, I had an appointment. I went in to see the doctor. They did a battery of tests, found nothing. Hematologist, x-rays, nothing. Finally, I said, "My daughter is in medical school, and she thinks I should have a CT scan." The doctor agreed, sent me to an off-site facility of the Mass General to have a CT scan. I met two technicians that I would get to know very well. CT scan is an easy test. You lie on a table, they tell you to hold your breath, and they slide you in and out of what looks like a big donut. It's not a big deal. After the tests were done, they said the results won't be ready till tomorrow, and off I went. While I was in the test, though, they kept telling me I wasn't breathing right. They had to take more pictures. That, at the time, meant nothing to me. As I was driving home, something started pulling me toward the Mass General Hospital. And as I got closer to the hospital, my cell phone rang. It was the doctor's secretary saying, "The doctor would like to see you." When I went upstairs, he was waiting for me in his doorway. He brought me in, he sat me down, he looked me in the eye, and he said, "You have renal cell carcinoma, cancer of the kidney." The intensity of that statement, I will never forget. You immediately think, how much time do I have? Who's going to take care of 13 kids? And at the time, we had 5 children under the age of 10, and the rest of them all over the place in different schools. How's my wife possibly going to do this by herself? Who's going to teach the boys to play ball? Who's going to protect the girls from the boys? All this crazy stuff goes through your head in an instant. He said to me, "I need to send you to see an oncologist immediately," and I stumbled out of his office and went to the cancer ward at Mass General. It was called Cox 2. I waited in that waiting room for 3 hours. When I was finally able to lift my head out of my hands and look around the room, I could see there were people in that room a lot worse off than I was. And I started thinking to myself, I can beat this cancer. I can fight this. I've been athletically trained. I know what to do. Not once did I think of God. The doctor finally called me in. He brought up on the computer monitor the pictures they had just taken. It showed a tumor the size of my fist sitting on my kidney. The pancreas was wrapped around the tumor, and the spleen and lymph nodes were infected as well. It was not a pretty picture. He said, "I need to send you to see a urologist immediately to have all this cut out." I said to him, "Doc, I've been here since 8 o'clock in the morning. It was 5 o'clock at night. I'm totally blown away. I need to bring my wife to ask all the questions." So we set up the appointment with that doctor you saw in the video, Dr. Frank McGovern, for 8 a.m. the next morning. When we went in to see Dr. McGovern, he's a surgeon. He's pragmatic. He doesn't pull any punches. My wife was there to ask the questions because I was too blown away. He starts by saying, "I'm going to cut open your ribs. I'm going to take, this is going to be a very ugly procedure. It's going to bleed through the womb. I have to take a piece of the pancreas. There's going to be a pancreatic surgeon in the operating room with me." He went on for 40 minutes to tell us how bad this was going to be. My wife did not say a single word for the entire consultation. I later found out that she was rebuking everything he said, and she was praying. Surgery was scheduled for December 9th of 1999. We had 21 days. In the gospel in James 5:14, it says, "Are you sick? If so, go see the presbyters of the church, the leaders, the priests, and have them pray over you, just as Jesus had sent the lepers." My wife, her sisters, took this literally. They put my name on the Novena to St. Anthony and put hundreds of them throughout the South Shore of Boston. People were praying for me everywhere. We went to healing masses where people would lay hands on me, a totally new experience. I'd never seen anything like this, but it was very powerful. I was at work, because just because you have cancer doesn't mean you don't go to work. So I was at work, and Judy called me up. She said, "I'm going to take you to a healing mass, and I want you to be ready." Now, I do everything my wife tells me. That's why we're married 45 years. So I was ready. She picked me up, I locked my car door, and I got into her car. And on the radio was Father Tom DiLorenzo talking about Blessed Faustina. I'd never heard of her before. I listened to this story all the way into the Mission Church in Roxbury, which is a healing shrine in Massachusetts, in Boston area. Judy looked at me while we were listening to this Chaplet of Divine Mercy and everything else. Now I know all about St. Faustina. And she said, "I need to get you a miraculous medal. It has great power." And at the time, I didn't wear any jewelry, never mind religious jewelry. We got to the church. I went into the back of that church, this beautiful basilica, and knelt down. And for the first time in my life, I prayed with my heart. To pray with your heart means to pray with love and to truly let go and give God control. As I did that, something physical struck me in the chest and knocked me backwards in the pew. I said to Judy, "What was that?" She said, "What was what?" And we continued to pray. Father McDonough came down, prayed over me, and this unbelievable warmth went up through my body, and my skin color changed right in front of my wife's eyes from the gray cancer color to my normal skin color. Next day, I had my bloods tested. They were back to normal. Scientific improbability. That day, she dropped me at work. She went home, and on the voicemail at home was a woman from the parish saying, "Mrs. Boyle, you don't know me, but I've been praying for your husband Artie on the novena to St. Anthony. 6 months ago, I lost a relic. I was just cleaning out my attic. I found the relic. I want Artie to have it. It's a relic of Blessed Faustina." I got in my car that evening to go home. I opened the door, and on the passenger seat is a miraculous medal on a man's chain. I immediately picked up my cell phone, called Judy, and I said, "That was fast. How'd you do that?" She said, "Do what?" To this day, we have no idea how the medal got there, but we pass it around to people in the family that are in need. I started to realize or recognize that God was trying to let me know things, and I should probably start to pay attention. On December 8th, the day before my surgery, the Feast of the Immaculate Conception, my parish had an all-night prayer vigil for me. Started with the Holy Mass, the most powerful prayer in our faith. I often tell people, if you want to have a Mass said for somebody, have it said for them while they're still alive. There's great power in the Mass. After Mass, they prayed all night. I coached a hockey team of 8-year-old kids at the time, and they came up the center aisle and put their hockey jerseys over the front banisters, the front pews, to pray for their coach. The varsity hockey team from Hingham followed and did the same thing. It was very powerful stuff. The next morning, my dad took me to the Mass General Hospital. The Mass General Hospital is a training hospital. I didn't know that. The anesthesiologist who was going to put an epidural in me, and an epidural just numbs your whole lower body, they stick it in your spine, he was in training too. I didn't know that. I found out pretty quick. He was trying to put the epidural in, and I could tell he was struggling mightily. And finally, the doctor just got frustrated. The guy said it was done. They said, "Let's go." They cut me from my belly button all the way up my back, literally cut me in half. The epidural fell out during the operation, so I woke up without any pain medicine. The pain was so intense, I was in and out of consciousness. While I was in there, they discovered a nodule the size of a golf ball in my thyroid. That had to come out too. This time, the anesthesiologist administered the muscle relaxant prior to the anesthesia. And when that happens, this unbelievable cold goes whipping through your body and feels like it's going to come flying out your mouth. And before I had a chance to say anything, they hit me up with the right stuff. But I'm telling you this for a reason. The anesthesia is supposed to help you forget the surgeries and forget the pain, and it didn't work so well. The good thing that happened is during the operation, the pancreatic surgeon was never needed. A membrane had grown between the pancreas and the tumor, protecting the pancreas. The doctor took out the kidney, the tumor, the adrenal gland, whatever else he had to take out, and never had to touch the pancreas, which sits in the kidney bed today. The pathology report came back a few weeks later. The doctor called me on my cell phone and left a message, and he was literally screaming into the cell phone saying, "We got it all. The margins are clear. Fantastic. Going to live a normal life." I hung up the phone, and I was stunned. I didn't expect to hear that. So I started saying to Jesus, "Thank you. Thank you for letting me stay here with my kids. This is awesome. What can I do for you? Just tell me. I'll do anything." Well, I listened. I didn't hear anything. So I didn't do anything. Very typical of a man. Right back into the rat race, chasing the almighty dollar. I didn't change a single thing in my life. Once you're a cancer patient, you remain a cancer patient. 3 months later, back in for more tests, same 2 technicians, everything's beautiful. 8 months later, the same 2 ladies, they said, "You're not breathing right. We need to take more tests." I started to get concerned. After the tests, one of the ladies said, "You might want to go back and see your doctor." So back to the Mass General I go. I go upstairs to see my doctor, and the first thing he says to me is, "I'm overworked." That's the last thing you want to hear from somebody trying to save your life. I said, "What do you mean?" He brought me in, showed me the monitor again, showed me the pictures. 3 tumors on my right lung. The cancer had metastasized. Metastatic renal cell carcinoma has no cure. There's no radiation, no chemotherapy. This was back in 2000. There's only extraction. Now they have some therapies they can play with, but there was only extraction. So the next visit was to the thoracic surgeon. My daughter and her husband, who were both in medical school, accompanied me and my wife to see the thoracic surgeon, Dr. Cam Wright at the Mass General. Now, when a doctor has bad news to give you, he sits behind his big desk because that's their protection between you and them. And he sat there saying to me, "I'm going to cut open your ribs, I'm going to take out your lung, I'm going to put it on the table, and I'm going to feel with my hands to make sure I get all the cancer." And after the 2 previous surgeries I had, I'm sitting there thinking to myself, there is no way that guy is going to touch me. I would rather die than go through that pain again. But my daughter and her husband, they said, "You don't have a choice. You have to go through with the surgery." So they scheduled surgery for September 14th of 2000. The doctor looked at me on the way out the door and he said, "Go home and put your house in order. You have less than 5% chance to survive." Why they tell you that stuff? I don't know. It takes away your hope. The depression and the anxiety that weighs on you when someone's going to tell you you're going to die is unbearable. You can barely put one foot in front of the other because you're scared. You don't know, and you're mostly scared for who you're going to leave behind, not necessarily for yourself, but I was scared for myself too. My brother-in-law, Kevin Gill, who's my best friend, played golf a couple of days later with another good friend named Rob Griffin. Rob and Kevin did not know each other. I coached against Rob in hockey, played with him, and Kevin and I were brother-in-laws, golf buddies, and everything else. Robbie and Kevin got invited to play golf together. Robbie said to Kevin, "How's Artie doing?" Kevin said, "Not too good," and told him the story. Robbie said to Kevin, "Have you ever heard of Medjugorje?" Kevin never heard of it, so they spent 18 holes talking about Medjugorje, much to the chagrin of their 2 playing partners. Kevin called me up after the round. He said, "Artie, have you ever heard of Medjugorje?" I said, "Yeah, you know, my wife got a book from my daughter on the messages of Medjugorje 10 years ago. And my wife would sit up while I'm trying to watch the Patriots or the Red Sox or something and try to read me these messages." Of course, I didn't pay any attention to her. It went in one ear and out the other. He said, "Do you want to go?" And the minute he said that, something just lit up inside of me. And right away, I said yes. I had no idea where we were going. Medjugorje is a little tiny village halfway across the world in Bosnia-Herzegovina, the old Yugoslavia. It was a communist country. A war had just ended. Where are we going over there for? Because the Blessed Mother was appearing every single day in that little village. And miracles were happening. So Kevin called Robbie, asked him if he wanted to go. Before Robbie ever gave him an answer, Kevin had bought 3 first-class tickets for all 3 of us. We were going. 1 week later, the 3 of us jumped on a plane to go to this little village in Bosnia-Herzegovina. When we were going, preparing for this, Judy had gotten into a Bible study with my son Nick, who was 5 years old at the time. She sent Nick into the kindergarten class. She went into the adult section. Afterwards, she came out. And, "Nick, what'd you learn?" Luke 1:27, "Be not afraid, your prayer has been heard." And the next week, while we were in Medjugorje, "Nick, what did you learn?" Luke 1:34, "Nothing is impossible with God." 2 things my wife needed to hear while her husband was halfway across the world in Medjugorje. When we got on the plane, I kept a journal. And in the journal, we all kept a journal, but I wrote in my journal, "I'm going to Medjugorje to be healed and to see the Blessed Mother. And although I may not actually see her, I know I'll be touched by her in some way." Faith defined in the gospel is the assurance of things hoped for and the evidence of things yet unseen. I had written with confidence the assurance of things hoped for in that book, and I would later get the evidence of things yet unseen. The best way I can describe Medjugorje, and for anybody that's been there, it's a place of supernatural peace. There's a church in the middle of the village, the Church of St. James. It was built way before the apparition started, and it holds 1,100 people. There were 95 families in the village at the time. Why would they build such a big church? Someone knew something was coming. To the left of that church, at the time we went, were boxes. And the boxes were the confessionals. And Robbie, Kevin, and I hadn't been in confession in 20, 30 years. We didn't know. So we said, if we're going to do this, we're going to do it right, we're going to go to confession first. After confession, we went into Mass. They prayed the rosary before Mass. And when 1,100 people sing between the decades of the rosary, the Ave Maria, when they sing with conviction, it literally lifts your soul into heaven. I knew I was in the right place. Robbie had a connection with somebody that did tours to Medjugorje, and it had been arranged for me to get prayed over by one of the visionaries, Viska. Each of the visionaries has a task. Pray for family, pray for youth, pray for the sick. Viska, one of her tasks was to pray for the sick. So it was a great grace that she was going to pray over me. After the next day we went to Mass, or after Mass, Jelka came out. We met Jelka, who was Viska's cousin. She was going to be our guide for the week. We were there September 4th till September 10th. Surgery was scheduled for September 14th. It was truly a trip of desperation. We said to Jelka, we met her, and she said, I'm sorry, I have bad news. Viska had to go to Rome to visit a sick friend. She won't be able to pray over you. It was disappointing, but we were in Medjugorje. The next day we went to Mass. It also happened to be Labor Day. Our wives had to get all our kids back into school all by themselves, and their husbands are off somewhere in a third world country. So Jelka said, what would you like to do? We said, well, we better get our wives something nice. So we went to a little jewelry store down the street called Leo's. We spent 45 minutes in that little tiny jewelry store buying rosary beads and all kinds of other jewelry. I bought 5 rosary bead bracelets for my daughters, and I was looking at the gold crosses and chains for my sons, and the thought went into my head was, this is expensive. But I thought to myself, if I can spend the money I spend on golf and hockey and everything else I waste money on, I can certainly spend it on Jesus. As that thought entered my head, there was a commotion immediately to my left. Kevin came over, put his arm around me. He said, do you know who that is standing right next to you? I looked. It was a small woman. I said, no. It was Viska. She had missed her plane from the night before. She just happened to stop in this jewelry store to buy a rosary ring, and she was now standing right next to me. Jelka explained who I was, and Viska took her tiny little hand and put it on my head to pray. Robbie and Kevin put their hands on my back. The heat that went through my body from her intense prayer caused them to sweat profusely. That was the beginning of our trip to Medjugorje. You saw in the video rosary beads turning to gold, the sun spinning and dancing. All those things happen to us, but they have nothing to do with Medjugorje. Those are nice touches for the people that happen to be there, but it's not at all what Medjugorje is about. Medjugorje is all about the left of St. James Church. We're going to go up Cross Mountain because it was said the Blessed Mother prayed with her son Jesus at the top of that mountain at sunrise every day. We're going up that mountain. I want every grace possible. On the way past the church to go up the mountain, Kevin looked over at the confessionals and said, you know, guys, I think I forgot a couple of things. I'm going back to confession. Kevin went back into confession. Robbie and I went to our room. After a little while, the door bursts open. Kevin comes in and says, you have to go back to confession. There's a priest there from England. He's unbelievable. You just got to go. He was so convicted in what he was telling us that the 3 of us got up and sprinted down Main Street, Medjugorje, to go to a place we tried to avoid for the last 30 years, the confessional. When I finally got into the confession, I met a priest from Liverpool, England, named Father Simon Cadwallader. To this very day, Father Simon is a dear family friend of all 3 families. He comes and lives with us for weeks at a time. He was in the missions, the St. James Society, and the missions in Lima, Peru, and when he wasn't there, he was in Liverpool, England with his dad. But on the way through, he would always stay with us for weeks at a time. We met the guy in a box halfway across the world in confession. Those usually aren't your best friends. In our case, it turned out to be that way. When I got into the confessional with him, he was so soft-spoken and so wonderful that I had the first sincere confession of my life. He told me the Eucharist is the most powerful medicine we have on earth. Take Jesus into your body as often as you can and ask him to heal you. He told me many other things in that confessional, and he could sense a growing excitement in all three of us. And before I left the confessional, he said in the words of St. Francis, go back home and preach the gospel, and when you have to, use words. He said, don't go home and talk about Medjugorje. People are going to think you're a whack job. Just go back and live your life, and they will ask you why. Why are you happy? What has changed in your life? And that's exactly what we did, and that's exactly what's happened. When I left the confessional, the anxiety, the depression that had been weighing so heavily upon me was gone. I was free as a bird. And I instantly realized that I was invited by the Blessed Mother to Medjugorje not for a physical healing necessarily, but certainly for a spiritual healing. And what I learned in Medjugorje is that we cannot be healed physically until we are healed spiritually. At least it's a big help. The way we're healed spiritually is through confession, a true, sincere confession, and one other thing. We left the confessionals and went to the top of Cross Mountain. On the way up the mountain, I could feel a pain in my right lung that I could put my finger on. And I said, man, this is getting worse. We got to the top of the mountain. It was a rainy day. People don't go up there during the rain. But on any given day, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of people on that mountain. We were the only three on the mountain. We were on top of that mountain, embracing, weeping, and crying out loud to Jesus Christ to heal me. Three things that three grown men would have not done in Main Street, Hingham. I'll tell you that right now. It was a whole new experience. We came down off the mountain, and I called my wife, and I said, something is going on over here. I don't know what's going on, but please call the doctor, because they're going to cut out my right lung when I get home, and schedule another CT scan. She called the doctor. The doctor's secretary called me back, left a voice message that I used to carry around with me. She said, Mr. Boyle, we know you're in Medjugorje. That's a beautiful thing. We know why you're there, but the fact is, you have cancer, and it's not going to disappear. So we're going to go ahead with the surgery. My wife did what any good wife would do. She got another doctor. This doctor had been originally recommended to us. Why we didn't take him, I don't know. But I later found out he had sent his parents to Medjugorje and had a picture of Medjugorje hanging in his office wall. God was working on my behalf. Medjugorje, at the time of the apparitions in 1981, June 24, 1981, 6 children saw the Blessed Mother. On June 25th, they took the entire village up the hill with them, but only the kids made it. After that, the village started going with them. It was a communist country at the time. Father Jozo Zovko was the pastor. Father Jozo told the kids, scolded them, do not talk about this. You cannot talk about your faith outside the church in a communist country, otherwise you get thrown in jail. The kids didn't listen to him. He became their protector. The communists threw him in prison. He spent 18 months in jail, and when he came out, they sent him to a place called Soroki Briege, where he was the pastor there. They wouldn't let him go back to Medjugorje. We wanted every grace possible, so we wanted to go see Father Jozo so he could pray over me. It's about 30 miles away. One of the guides took us out there. When we walked in, we were met by 2 translators, Nancy and Patrick Latta. Nancy said, isn't it wonderful the leaders of American families would come to Medjugorje to pray? Please come see me before you leave. There was a big commotion. We lost track of Nancy. We figured we'd never see her again. The day we're leaving Medjugorje, a woman approached us and said, would you like to go see Nancy? We said, of course. And we followed her through the grape fields of Medjugorje. It's beautiful. The vistas over there are beautiful. Very rocky, hard terrain. We went to Nancy and Patrick's castle. It's literally a castle in the middle of Medjugorje. After a while, everybody that was in the room dispersed, the courtyard rather, dispersed except for Robbie, Kevin, myself, and Nancy. Kevin gave Nancy a pen and paper to take the information, her information. She bowed her head to pray. And after a minute, she looked up, she looked me in the eye, and she said, "You need to forgive." I said, "Forgive? I've been to confession twice. I got nothing." She said, "You need to forgive your mother and father." And my mother and father had just gotten divorced after 43 years of marriage, and I immediately broke down. Robbie and Kevin broke down. 3 grown men crying healing tears in Medjugorje. I called my wife, and I said, "Please have my entire family present, my brothers, my sister, my kids, their spouses, everybody, when I get home." And she did that. And I brought my father up in front of the family, and I forgave him for divorcing my mother. What I learned in Medjugorje is that we bury stuff so deep inside of us that we don't even know what it is we need to forgive. So we need to pray for that grace to figure it out. Who do we need to forgive? Because once we forgive and have a sincere confession, we become an open vessel for the Holy Spirit to come in to heal us. I believe this with all my heart, and I believe that's one of the things that happened to me. When we got back, the CT scan was rescheduled 2 days before the surgery. I went in to see the same 2 technicians. They told me I wasn't breathing right. I started to get excited. They gave me the films. I went flying back to the Mass General Hospital. I ran upstairs to the thoracic surgeon's office, and I presented him the films. He took the films, and he said, "Wait a minute." After 5 minutes, he called me into his office, and instead of sitting behind the big desk, he was standing in his threshold, rubbing his fingers to his chin, saying, "They're gone." The large tumor in the upper lobe had completely disappeared, and the 2 smaller tumors had shrunk to such an insignificant size that on September 14th of 2000, the feast of the Triumph of the Cross, instead of having my right lung cut out, I was playing golf with Robbie and Kevin. Jesus Christ, through the intercession of Mary, had healed me in Medjugorje. However, before we went, I had been biopsied. We knew this was renal cell carcinoma in my lung. I wasn't letting anybody touch me. I was too fearful of surgeries and doctors at that point. That was in September. In November, I went to an apparition with Ivan Dragicevic, the visionary you saw in the video, that was in Quincy, Mass., a local parish near me. I brought a really good friend of mine that was really sick. Ivan went up to the front and had his apparition, and afterwards he turned around, and as he's walking back, I was sitting right in the front with my buddy. He winked at me. And I said to my buddy, "You just got a blessing." I don't know what that was, but you just got a blessing. After church, there were 600 people in the church. It was packed. It's a big church. Everybody's milling out, and somebody taps me on the shoulder. I turn and I look, and it's Ivan, just looking at me. And I'm just looking at him because I don't know what to say. I was just taken aback by the fact he's standing there. Then he turns to walk away. And I said, "Oh my God, I got so many questions for this guy." I went to chase him down because I wanted to take him to lunch or dinner. And I got intercepted by a woman that was taking him around. She goes, "No, he doesn't do that." So I figured I'd never see him again. We live in a town called Hingham in the Boston area, south of Boston. It's a nice town. It's a coastal community. Some of you know it. And the women there, let's say, are pretty well off. So they get their hair done, they get their nails done, they go to the spa, they do all this stuff. And my wife would always complain to me that she wasn't getting to do all the nice things that all her girlfriends are doing. I said, when you have 13 kids, it's kind of tough to do all those things. And I said, "Honey, you need new friends." So she started praying for new and holy friends. On Christmas Eve morning, that December, the Boston Globe, which is the most secular newspaper in Boston, published a front-page story called "It's a Wonderful Life." It was my story of my healing, written by a Jewish writer, and it was the most beautiful Catholic story. Yvonne read the story, picked up the phone, called the house. My wife answered. She goes, "Oh my God, I've been praying for new friends, new holy friends, but Yvonne?" She couldn't believe it. invited us to his house for a private apparition. I got to take him to dinner, ask all the questions. He still hasn't told me any of the secrets. I've been trying to get it out of him for years. It's not happening. And we become very close friends, and I've traveled all around the world with him giving talks, and I'm kind of like his warm-up act. So it's a pretty cool experience, one that I do not take for granted or lightly at all, trust me. And Father Simon was also a dear friend. Father Simon said, Artie, you need to have the surgery. Jesus' hands will be the hands of the surgeon. Yvonne promised me the Blessed Mother would be in the operating room with me. With those kind of odds, I said I might as well have the surgery. So a year after I got back from Medjugorje, I went in and I had laparoscopic lung surgery, or whatever you want to call it, where they weren't as invasive as they were going to be. So they took 2 chunks of my right lung. It was renal cell carcinoma. Why it hadn't grown and killed me or disappeared like the other ones, the doctors didn't know. But 3 months later, I went back in for tests. There was very little evidence, almost no evidence of any extraction of my right lung whatsoever. And I have a perfectly normal, healthy right lung today. Jesus Christ, through the intercession of Mary, had healed me in Medjugorje. I've been back to Medjugorje 19 times. I've taken my family, I've seen all kinds of miracles, and I've seen the ultimate miracle, and the ultimate gift was just to go to heaven. I've seen people literally believe so much in their faith that I know they went to heaven. But I took my family, 7 of my kids once, along with the Griffins, the Gills, and the O'Donohues. There were 27 of us. We went in July. 2 of my kids didn't want to go. My daughter, Catherine, was a teenager, went kicking and screaming. She hated to be there. My son, Chris, was kind of lost. We consecrated him to the Blessed Mother and said, you got this one. You got to figure this out. Catherine went back the next year, the next 2 years, and worked for 6 weeks with Nancy and Patrick Latta. Came back from there and started teaching theology at Cathedral High School in Boston, and now works at the Archdiocese of Boston in the New Evangelization. My son Chris came back, started teaching theology at Catholic Memorial High School, was a coach and a mentor to 7th and 8th grade boys for 11 years before he decided that he got the calling, entered the seminary at St. John's. After 2 years, they sent him to Rome, and he was ordained this past May a priest in the Archdiocese of Boston. The Blessed Mother That's a tremendous gift to our family. When you watch your son celebrate Mass, and just a quick story, he did 2 Masses at our homes. One was at my daughter's house and one was at mine. And both the Gospels happen to be, one is you got to hate your mother and hate your father and hate your family members. And the other one was you can't be a prophet in your own land. Those are the first 2 homilies he had to give us. He goes, this is nuts. But it worked out beautifully, and he did a great job. But I've been back there so many times, I've seen so many things happen. There are 5 main messages that the Blessed Mother has for us in Medjugorje. There are many. It's been 37 years of daily messages, but 5 main messages for all of us to remember. One is to pray, and pray with your family. In one of the meetings with the Blessed Mother, and they see her just as you see me now. They see her, touch her, feel her, everything, smell her. She said, dear children, there can be no peace in the world until there is peace in the family. And there can be no peace in the family until there is prayer in the family. Pray and pray the rosary with your family. It has great power. She also said to them, dear children, if you have an opportunity to come see me or to go see my son at Holy Mass, don't come see me. Go to Mass, because that's where my son is. Everything she does and has done, and every one of her apparitions on this planet has been to point us to Jesus Christ. She invites us to put the Bible in a place of prominence in our home and to read it. It's the Word of God. It's our water. It's our sustenance. Read it. She invites us to go to confession once a month. In John 20, Jesus breathed on them and said, peace be with you. Receive the Holy Spirit. Peace be with you. As the Father has sent me, so I send you. Go out and forgive them their sins. Those sins you forgive are forgiven. Those sins you retain are retained. Confession in our faith is not an option. It's a sacrament given to us by Jesus, which gives us a grace which enables us to walk in the light of Christ. Without the sacrament of reconciliation, this life is way too hard. And she invites us to fast on Wednesdays and Fridays on bread and water. And she says, if you can't do that, then give something up that you like. She understands how tough fasting is for all of us. And if you're sick, you don't fast. But she said, give something up. Because when you do that, it gives you a discipline over your own body. When I talk to the kids, especially the 10th and 11th graders, most of them are all athletes. And most of them are in training for some sport or other. And what do? They work out. They watch what they eat. They take care of themselves, and they do it all so they can be better. Well, we do the same thing with fasting for our prayer. It makes our prayer better. It makes us more powerful. I'll leave a little time for questions. I'd like to answer some questions about what the Vatican thinks, if you have any. But I'm going to end it by saying in Paul's letter to the Galatians, he says he was crucified with Christ, that he no longer lives, that Jesus Christ now lives in him. My prayer for all of you is that you are crucified in Christ, that you no longer live, and that Jesus Christ will live in all of you. Thank you, and God bless you. Does anybody have any questions? All right. I'm going to be quiet for a minute. Oh, they're going to do a free will offering now. Gentlemen. Actually, while they're doing that, I'm going to tell you one story about why I know the Vatican is very in tune to what we're doing. Medjugorje, whether you know it or not, has become part of the Vatican. The Vatican has taken it over, and it's now actually part of the Vatican state. There is an Archbishop Hoser that has been assigned to Medjugorje for the past year and a half to see just how the fruits of Medjugorje were playing out, to see how wonderful it was. You can tell a place by its fruits. In Medjugorje, there's been 1,400 vocations in the United States alone. There's been millions of communions, millions of confessions. Those are the true fruits of Medjugorje. Forget about the healings, which there are 600 documented healings in Medjugorje. The Vatican has those. There's been tens of thousands of conversions. But the true fruits, the Eucharist, confession, vocations. My wife and I went over to Rome to visit my son who was studying abroad. This is when St. John Paul II was the Pope. We arrived on a Wednesday, and we're going home on a Wednesday. And the only day of a papal audience is on a Wednesday. So I knew Wednesday was too late. My wife would say, hey, we're in Rome, I want to see the Pope. And if you knew my wife, I better see the Pope. So I said, we'll go Sunday, we'll go to St. Peter's Church, and we'll watch Mass. We'll go to Mass. So we did that. He was at his summer home, and they videoed the Mass. So she never saw the Pope. She was so angry with me. We come out of there, she goes, all I want to do is see the Pope. I'm in Rome. This has to happen. I'm like, oh, what am I supposed to do? So I'm sitting at a little cafe. This is Sunday at late afternoon, and I see a helicopter fly into the Vatican. I said, that can only be one guy. So the next morning, I picked up the phone and called the American Embassy. And Ray Flynn, who was the former ambassador to the Vatican and happened to be former mayor of Boston and was a friend of mine, had just sent information over to the Vatican about my healing. And I said, my name is Artie Boyle from Boston. And they said, who? Yeah, I said, I figured that reaction. I said, Artie Boyle from Boston, I think you have some information. Oh, yeah, we know who you are. I said, great. I would like to go see the Pope. And they said, well, we'll give you tickets to Wednesday's papal audience. I said, that's not going to work. This is Monday. That's not going to work. We fly out at 7 a.m. I can only see him tomorrow. And I start laughing, realizing how stupid I sounded. I'm going to tell the Pope when he can see me. So she laughs along with me because she realized I knew I was being a jerk, but she said, call me later in the day. So at 5 o'clock, I called her up. The embassy was closed. I figured she just blew us off. We went to dinner that night. After dinner, Brendan, my son, was going back to his dorm, and Judy and I were going back to the hotel. And Judy says to my son, this is the power of prayer, you promise me you pray the rosary tonight, and I promise you we will see the Pope tomorrow. I said, you can't tell him that. What the heck? Shush, he shushes me. He goes off. He says, okay, Mom, I promise I'll pray the rosary. We walk back to our hotel. I'm walking through the lobby, and the concierge says, Mr. Boyle? I said, who knows me in Rome? He goes, I have a note. I said, a note? So I go over and I grab the note. It says, El Papa, Bronze Door, 8:15. I said, what does this mean? He says, do you know the Pope? We call up Brendan right away, and I said, this is insane. I think we're going to see the Pope. Get over here by 7:30. So he comes over. We go into St. Peter's Square. We're asking the Swiss guide along the way, where's this bronze door? They can't even, they don't know. Finally, we get in there, and we're looking around, and there's a huge doorway. You see, when the Pope comes out to talk to the crowd, as you're looking at him over to the right, there's this huge doorway. And there were a couple of Swiss guards with their spears standing there. So I said, maybe we'll go ask those guys. So I'm walking up, and I get halt. And I said, but I got a note. And a big Swiss guard comes around the corner and says, Mr. Boyle? I go, yes. We followed him in. He took us across the courtyard, passed us off to another Swiss guard, took us up an elevator, 3 flights, passed us off to another Swiss guard, who took us down this big hallway, went 90 degrees right, and it was all the coat of arms of all the popes of the past. It was beautiful. Right to this enormous mahogany door, which is St. John Paul's apartment. Swiss guard standing in front of it. So we're talking to these guys, and they took all of our cameras. They only allow professional photography, but I had this little tiny camera that I was able to put in my pocket, and I kept it there. So we got into the Pope's apartment. It was literally his dining room, and we're waiting to see St. John Paul II, the 3 of us. On one end was Michelangelo's The Crucifixion. On the other end was Michelangelo's The Resurrection. And then there was this 4-foot solid gold statue of the Blessed Mother and Jesus. It was like, you kidding me? And then the Pope comes out all in white. My wife cried the entire time. She could not stop weeping. I had snapped a couple of pictures, so I had proof of myself that I was there. So I was pinching myself. But we got to see St. John Paul II. And when you looked into his eyes, they were so blue and so clear, it felt like you could see forever. And he blessed us. He blessed my wife and my son first, and then when I went up, his secretary or whatever said, this one gets a special blessing, because he had read about Medjugorje. He didn't say a lot. He just blessed me. We thanked him, and off we went. All I'm going to say is if St. John Paul II didn't believe in his whole heart in Medjugorje, we never would have got within 100 yards of that apartment. The only reason we were there is I was healed in Medjugorje, and he knew all about it. He's also been quoted as saying, in Medjugorje, are the people praying? Yes, Holy Father. Are they going to Mass? Yes. Are they going to confession? Yes. Are they going to adoration? Yes. Then tell them to go to Medjugorje. It's a beautiful, spiritual place of peace. And if you think about it, there aren't any distractions, no newspapers, TVs. You're usually there by yourself, so there's not a lot of family pressures. It's prayer, Mass, Rosary, Stations of the Cross, community, sitting around just talking about how beautiful it is, the mountains, the hills. If you haven't been there, go, yes. I had mentioned that. The Vatican has taken it over as part of the Vatican State, yes. I had mentioned it just a few minutes ago. The Vatican is also, it's a shrine, so now priests can lead groups to Medjugorje. They could not do that before this. They could go to Medjugorje, but they could not lead a group. So a priest of any standing, meaning cardinal, bishop, monsignor, pastor, can lead a group to Medjugorje. Anybody. And I'm being told that the first 7 days of the apparitions will be recognized as official very soon. I can't promise you this because the church works like the slowest institution in the world. But the first 7 days will be recognized, and until the apparitions are over, they can't possibly do anything more than that. You discern for yourself at that point. But I've been there enough, and I've seen enough to know it's real. Any other questions? Yes. The question is it hard walking? The terrain is very difficult. They have paths. I mean, 40, 50 million people have been there, so they've really worn out some good paths. But the rocks themselves, they're very smooth from all the people that have been on them. But the hill, the big mountain, is a hard climb. The small mountain is the Apparition Hill where Our Lady appeared. Isn't as bad, not even close. But then there's also a Blue Cross area where it's not bad at all, where Our Lady would appear to the children while the communists were trying to find them at the top of the hill. They found a place down low. So that's also a very special place. Yes, Deb? I don't know if you heard that, but they have 3 children. Their middle child was born without arms, and she was floating up Mount Krušovice. So that's awesome. I've seen people carrying people. Blind people have gone up to the top of the mountain. There's all kinds of stories about people and things that have happened. Yes. I'm familiar with most of the apparition sites: Lourdes, Knock, Guadalupe, Akita, Cabejo, Medjugorje. The one that is currently still taking place is Medjugorje. The peace there, I've been to Knock, I've not been to Lourdes. I'm sure Lourdes is fantastic. I would love to go there one day. But my experience is Medjugorje, and I was healed there. So I would say go to Medjugorje, just because, you know. But I would love to go to Lourdes, and probably will someday. But you could be healed here at home. You don't have to go to Medjugorje. It's just that it's such, you get yourself into such a state of peace that I believe, what I believe happened to me, I got in such a state of peace during that week that I was there that I believe my immune system rebooted itself and killed the cancer. That's what I think. The last day I was in Medjugorje, I went to the top of the mountain, and I lay prostrate at the top of the mountain, and I looked up at Jesus and I said, "Take me now. I will never feel this peace again." It was the peace of heaven. He didn't do that. He kept me here. My wife wouldn't have liked it anyway, but I would have loved it. And I tell you, I have not felt anything close to that peace since. So it's a struggle. It's become a struggle instead of, because I know what heaven can be like. And it's going to be awesome. We just got to be prepared to go there. And that's the hard part. Yes. So they have a Croatian Mass, they have a Pilgrim Mass, they have an English Mass, the German Mass. I just came back from the Youth Festival. The Youth Festival had 80,000 people, mostly young people. 714 priests can celebrated the Mass at one time. All of those Masses were done in Croatian. The Croatian village that lives there, it's 100% attendance at Mass. It's 100% Catholic, Medjugorje. There's Muslims and Serbs all over the place around it, but Medjugorje itself is 100% Catholic. It's a very spiritual place. So it's, but their Masses, they're jammed all the time. Yes. So she's describing how difficult it was. She had overcome cancer, was going through chemos, and you look great now, so you did good, right? You're all good now? Yeah. And talking about the rosary and how to pray it, a lot of people don't know how to pray the rosary. The rosary is the story of Jesus Christ. The Blessed Mother tells us, as a matter of fact, the 6 children that saw Mary, when they first saw her, she didn't teach them the rosary. It's too much. She taught them the Peace Rosary, 7 Our Fathers, 7 Hail Marys, 7 Glory Bees. That way they could gradually get into the rosary. And that's what she tells us to do with our children. Invite them, gradually get into it. Don't try and strong on them, which is not bad advice for sure. But it is hard to get up there. But if you do get up there and you did it, God bless you. Awesome. Anybody else? We got a million stories, but that's okay. Thank you all very much.
You want to say something? Just before we conclude, we certainly want to thank Artie for sharing such good news. You know, this is true evangelization, sharing good news, and what a great message for us to hear. This has been a combined effort of Holy Cross Church in DeWitt, Immaculate Conception here, and Kevin Hanlon's family, but particularly Margaret here has been the real mainstay trying to get all this together, so we're very, very grateful to Margaret, to the Hanlon family, and to the parishes for making this opportunity. And before I turn this over to Margaret, I'd like to take the opportunity to say how important it is for us to pray the intercession of our Blessed Mother. And this is the Church of the Immaculate Conception, so I'd ask you to join me in a Hail Mary to pray for Artie and his family, to pray for Kevin Hanlon and his family, and to pray for all those who are in need of healing in any way. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
I'm so grateful again that everyone here came. His talk was amazing, and it's such an inspiration, and I just encourage all of us to keep going in our spiritual journey. I remember my own spiritual journey. My father, Don Hanlon, I don't know if you guys know him, but he was very determined to get us back to the church, and he would kneel down every night and pray, and then he would throw out little tidbits. Did you ever hear of Fatima? Did you ever hear this? Well, one day he gave me this book on Medjugorje, and my neighbor gave me the same book the same week. She told me about it, and I was living a very sinful life at that time, very sinful. And I was working at 95X, which was the home of rock and roll, and I decided on my 3-hour lunch hour I was going to read the book. So I started reading this book, hoping that I was making sales while I was out for 3 hours. And as soon as I read this book by Wayne Weibel called Medjugorje, The Message, which you read too, I was instantly changed. I thought to myself, this is true. This is true. So I went to the cathedral. I said, I'm going to go to confession. And I was so nervous because of my sinful life that I thought, okay, how am I going to do this? I haven't been here in many, many years. So I decided I'll say it's been 9 or more years, because that was still true, since I've been to confession. And I started to unload everything. And I had such a powerful experience. And then I looked around the cathedral and I thought, what are all these people doing here during the week? Like, this is really weird. There are business people at Mass during the week. I didn't even know there was a weekday Mass. And that was the beginning of the end of my old life and my journey towards God. And it really changed my life, and I've gone to Mass almost every single day since that day in 1991. So I encourage you guys to try it, because it's very powerful. It doesn't mean you're without suffering. We've had terrible suffering in our family. But it means that God is with you, and he will help you. And stories like this really help all of us. So thank you for coming.
I forgot to mention, which I always do, because a talk like this, you can only retain so much information. we did eventually write a book, and the book is 6 Months to Live, 3 Guys on the Ultimate Quest for a Miracle. It's a real easy read. I can read it, so it's not a big deal. And we have an audio book out, and I actually read the audio book as well. And you can get it on Amazon or Barnes & Noble or something like that. I just want to mention that it's out there if you want to pass this kind of information on to